Call the roller of big cigars, the muscular one, and bid him whip in kitchen cups concupiscent curds. Let the wenches dawdle in such dress as they are used to wear, and let the boys bring flowers in last month's newspapers. Let B be finale of scene. The only emperor is the emperor of ice cream. Take from the dresser of deal, lacking the 3 glass knobs, that sheet on which she embroidered fantails once and spread it so as to cover her face. If her horny feet protrude, they come to show how cold she is and dumb. Let the lamp affix its beam. The only emperor is the emperor of ice cream. This poem, The Emperor of Ice Cream, by Wallace Stevens, was my father's favorite. He didn't force me to listen to it once a year, usually after Christmas, most likely on New Year's Eve. No, he made me read it out loud every year. From the time I was about 7, I did not understand what concupiscent curds were at 7, or even now really at 52. Wenches, was I allowed to say that out loud? This poem felt dirty, almost, when I read it out loud, once a year, every year, out of the paperback that my father went and grabbed from the very top shelf where he kept it, next to all of his favorite books. But my father loved it, and he made me read it out loud. He didn't want us to hear him say it. He wanted to hear me say it. That thrilled me. It is a perfect summer afternoon. I did not go to the pool on this day because in my hot little 10-year-old hand is burning one of the children's season tickets I received as part of a deal I got at Roy Rogers, my preferred fast food chain. We lived at that time in the suburbs of Washington, D.C., and I had a Roy Rogers child meal set of tickets to 12 Baltimore Oriole home games. They came in a strip of heavy, old-school, glossy ticket paper, like movie tickets used to be. They were perforated together, and for each game you tore one off and brought it to the gate. The Orioles played at Memorial Stadium when I was a kid, the ballpark of my father's youth as well, and it always felt to me like going to a castle. My dad was never unhappy at the ballpark. I waited for my father to come home that day, early, so that we could go to this game. He got home later than he was supposed to, and I am pretty sure I whined to my mother about him being late. I don't remember much about the waiting, except that it was interminable, at least at that time. I do remember my dad being not happy that I was so excited to go to the game. It was unintentional excitement. I think that if I truly thought in that moment that my dad was too tired or whatever to go, I wouldn't have said a word. But I was ready and waiting at the door. I had our gloves in my lap and would have burst through the garage and right into my dad's truck had I not seen the look on his face. I didn't know what to do. I would have offered to not go, but I was not invited into that conversation. It was a very heated conversation between my parents, and then I was ordered into the car. I felt badly, but opted just for quiet on the ride into the city, a ride I usually looked forward to. I don't know what made it better eventually, except that it was baseball. My dad always loved baseball. We ended up having a really good night. I was always struck by how quickly my dad could turn a mood or an evening around, one way or the other. But I think it was the Cal Ripken Jr. bobblehead that kept my father in the game that night. He held onto that bobblehead for years for me, quote unquote, along with all of my baseball cards. My father had thousands, tens of thousands of baseball cards and records and stamps. He collected collectible things the way old women collect scraps of twine and recipes and tissues in their robe pockets. Hold on to it, he would say. Save it. Do not open that box of Wheaties. It will be worth something someday. My father was not only the most well-organized hoarder I had ever seen, but he was also exceedingly superstitious, to an almost hilarious degree. When I was a teenager, I mocked him a bit, carefully, if I thought he might be in a good enough mood to take it. He might walk into a room and I would start to rock the rocking chair with my hand, but without anyone in it. This was normally verboten. He had yelled at me for this very thing once when I was a little kid, and I think I mocked him as a way to get back at him for that little humiliation. His eyes would widen and he would look at me like, "How dare you?" although he never said it. And then he might relax a minute and say, "Oh, very funny." But sometimes not. And I would get yelled at for rocking the chair or dashing under a ladder or opening an umbrella in the house, even down in the mudroom, and only to see if it would work before stepping out into the rain. But no ladders, no umbrellas, no rocking of rocking chairs. Oh, and we had to throw all of the salt over our left shoulder if we spilled it. I am not sure what bad luck my father foresaw happening to us, but he was quite adamant about the violation of these rules. It's strange because my father was a very smart guy. Before he died, he was a sought-after civil engineer for large construction projects, like the tunnels under Chicago and the Washington, D.C. metro system. He believed in science, but was afraid to not believe in God. He was amazing at math, but only admired poets like Wallace Stevens and W.H. Auden and Bob Dylan. I once picked up a sled dog near Hibbing, Minnesota, and thought of going there and sending my dad a postcard. We weren't on the best of terms back then, and I was really tired that day, so I didn't do it. Predictably, I regret it. I knew I would regret it the second I turned around, telling myself I'd be back that way one day. Liar. My father loved all kinds of music as long as it was rock and roll and was written between 1952 and 87, because he dabbled in the Traveling Wilburys and Tom Petty, but anything he really loved happened between 1958 and 1974-ish. Those were the good years. He didn't have time for jazz, and he would listen to the Kingston Trio from my mother. But if it didn't have a Fogerty, Dylan, or Clapton in the liner notes, I'm not sure he was truly interested, unless it was the Rolling Stones. "Just listen to the words, Michelle," he would say, urging me to listen more, harder. I'm not sure how much straining I was supposed to do to verify that I was listening, but I leaned in more, just to prove I could. And I did listen. I listened to my father all of the time. At least I did for a very long time. I read everything he told me to read, from The Greatest Story Ever Told to East of Eden. He once gave me an old-timey looking paperback called Hot Rod that I thought looked ridiculous, but I ended up reading it 3 times, and I still remember it to this day. We used to spend hours at the Yankee Paperback Book Exchange in downtown Montpelier debating on how to divvy up the day's take of paperbacks, betting each other that one or the other would be done faster, so we should get to take home one more book. My father was born in West Virginia in 1943. He did not have electricity or indoor plumbing until he was 6. This fascinated me as a child. My whole childhood was a pretty standard 1970s and 80s suburban childhood. And so imagining my dad, who knew everything and took me to baseball games on Saturdays, as a kid who had to walk down the path to an outhouse, possibly killing copperheads with a hatchet on the way at the ripe old age of 4. By the time he was 6, my grandfather had a job on the railroad and my dad had a younger brother. They moved to Baltimore City, and my dad remained a lifelong Baltimorean, as he said. My dad passed in April of 2020 during COVID, right after they announced that the MLB season wouldn't happen. I think he felt isolated and sad. He had a heart attack, but also had other health issues at that point. I called him on his birthday, 2 weeks before he died. He had been suffering from Alzheimer's and was having trouble speaking. So I asked my mom to put the phone on speaker, and I would just talk to him. For 2 hours, I rambled on about Trump and the election and all of the other political things he loved. He said a name or two, once hollering Nancy, and I knew he meant Nancy Pelosi. My dad was a lifelong Democrat, except for that time he voted for Reagan, that I never quite forgave him for. I finally let the call go, wished him a happy birthday, and vowed to read more political stuff because I was sorely lacking in my ability to monologue about Congress for very long. He died, though, before we had that next conversation. In the throes of a global pandemic with 5 kids at home and trying to divorce a now ex-husband, I didn't call in time, and I couldn't see him. He never had a funeral or a memorial, really, of any sort. So I guess this is my way of marking him as having been here. Cheers, Dad. Happy Father's Day. You were a good one. Thank you for joining me today for another essay. If you would like to contribute a comment, a question, or an essay of your own, please visit me at mishkennedy.com. I would love to hear from you. I hope you enjoy this beautiful day, wherever and whenever you are. As my dad always said, aside from if I get up out of this chair and you may be a pain, but you're not a window, if you wake up on the right side of the dirt, you still have a shot at a good day. So there's still a shot. Take it.